Christianity arrived in Britain very early. One claim is that the faith was first brought to Britain in the 1st century AD by St. Aristobulus, one of Christ's 70 apostles. It is stated in the writings attributed to St. Hippolytus of Rome, written in the 3rd century AD. Yet historians state that St. Joseph of Arimathea, the man who gave his tomb to Christ, came to Britain and built the first church there on an island in the Somerset Levels, where the town of Glastonbury now stands. Regardless of the truth of St. Joseph's coming into Britain, Glastonbury was widely regarded as having the oldest church in Britain. This in fact makes sense, as Glastonbury, then being an island on the coast of the Bristol Channel, was a centre of trade between Britain and continental Europe. Around Glastonbury can be a number of thorn trees, which are descendants of the original Holy Thorn of Glastonbury. The story goes that St. Joseph brought with him on his journey a staff cut from the same thorn tree from which Christ's crown of thorns was made. When he arrived in Britain, being tired from the journey, St. Joseph stuck this staff into the ground and fell asleep. In a dream, he was told by an angel to settle in this place. When he awoke, the staff had blossomed into a living tree. What is remarkable about the Glastonbury blossoms not only in the spring, but at Christmas as well. In AD 43, Britain became part of the Roman Empire. The Romans failed to conquer the whole of Britain. The far north known by the Britons as Cardonia was too difficult to retain control over. The northern border was established through the famous wall built by the Emperor Hadrian, stretching across the country from the Solway Firth to what's now Newcastle upon Tyne. Briefly, a second frontier further north between the Firth of Clyde and the Firth of Forth, and as the Antonine Wall was built, but soon after abandoned. Native people living south of the Antonine Wall became known as Britons. They spoke a form of the Brittonic language, an ancient form of Welsh. Those north of the Antonine Wall were known as the Picts. In the late 3rd or early 4th century, Britain had its first martyr, St. Alban. St. Alban was a Roman soldier who had converted to Christianity and was executed on a hill just outside the Roman town of Verulamium, north of London. St. Alban's grave on this hill became a major Christian shrine around which was built the present city of St. Albans. This is the present cathedral at St. Albans, in which the shrine is held, and this is the present shrine. Other evidence of early Christianity in Britain is the house church at Lullingston Roman Villa in Kent. And these are frescoes from that house church, which are now preserved in the British Museum in London. The frescoes show people in the Orans position, the posture early Christians assumed during prayer. Another is the mosaic at Hinton at another Roman villa from Hinton St Mary in Dorset, which is believed to be the earliest depiction of Christ in Britain, which shows Christ with the hero symbol as a halo. First two letters of the Greek word Christos. In 306, the Roman general Constantine was proclaimed emperor in the city of York. Emperor Constantine would go on to claim rule over the whole of Roman Empire. He would also convert to Christianity and end the persecution of Christians. When Rome fell in 410, the Roman army was withdrawn from Britain in order to defend the heartlands of the empire. The native Britons were told to defend themselves. Old Roman Britain was already subject to Irish raids, and of the defences of Hadrian's Wall unprotected, Picts from north of the Roman frontier attacked the south. There also rose a new heresy during this time, led by a British monk named Pelagius. Pelagius' basic teaching was that people could be saved by their own efforts alone, without the grace of God. The Gaulish bishop named St. Germanus of Auxerre was invited to Britain to combat this heresy. While in Britain, he also led the Britons to a miraculous victory without the shedding of blood over the Picts, known as the Alleluia victory, at which St. Germanus led the army in a triumphant shout of Alleluia, at which the depicts scattered in panic. Some claim that one of the British people who became a pupil of St. Germanus was St. Illtyd. St. Illtyd founded a monastery at the place which became known as Llanilltyd Fawr, what is now Llantwit Major in South Wales. This monastery had a famous school, one of the few left in Britain which preserved learning during this period of turmoil. A number of St. Illtyd's pupils became saints, including Saints Gildas the Wise, Samson of Dol, and possibly David of Wales. St. David and his fellow British saints often sought to remote places to live, where they established smaller monastic communities known in Welsh as a clan. These settlements and their churches attracted local people who came to live nearby, thus Christianizing the farthest regions of the country. This is St. David's Cathedral in Pembrokeshire in South Wales, on the site of St. David's original monastery. Today, many Welsh towns and villages have the name Clan at the beginning of their name, with the name of the saint following it. For example, Llanbadarn Fawr after St. Padarn, Llangollen after St. Colin, and Llandudno after St. Tudno. Another British monastic pioneer was St. Ninian. St. Ninian was born just before the end of Roman rule, just south of Hadrian's Wall. He went to Rome to be educated, where he was made a priest and a bishop before being sent back to serve in Britain. He's believed to have also visited St. Martin of Tours and learned from him the ideal of a monastic missionary bishop. St. Ninian would follow this model himself. St. Ninian would establish his monastery north of Hadrian's Wall in what is now the southwest corner of Scotland, an area inhabited by the Southern Picts. St. Ninian built a church here which would become known as Candida Casa, or the White House. Today the town is called Whithorn in Galloway. The ruins of Whithorn Cathedral stand on the site of St. Ninian's original church. This monastery became a base for missionary work in the north. Close by to Whithorn is St. Ninian's Cave, where the saint would withdraw for private prayer. Other famous early monastic sites were the island of Bardsey, or Innisfenley, the island of 20,000 saints, as it is known, and the island of Calday in South Wales. Post-Roman Britain, meanwhile, was still under attack from the north. According to ancient chronicles, the man who assumed leadership over post-Roman Britain was a man known as Vortigern. The chronicles tell that in order to defend Britain against the Picts, Vortigern hired foreign mercenaries. These are Jutes from Jutland, part of what is now Denmark. These mercenaries fought the Picts, but demanded land in payment. They eventually established control over the area of Kent, which they made into a kingdom of their own. Soon other related people from central northwestern Europe began invading and settling in the heartlands of Britain. These people were Angles, who settled in the north and Midlands, and Saxons, who settled in the south. Different groups established small kingdoms of their own. These groups of Angles, Saxons, and Jutes would eventually adopt a common identity as Anglo-Saxons, later becoming known as the English. These people were pagans worshipping the traditional Germanic gods. St. Gildas the Wise was a monk during this period. Born in the area of Strathclyde, he was educated under St. Illtyd, and afterwards left Britain with British refugees who were fleeing the Anglo-Saxon invasion. These refugees established colonies in Armorica and Gaul. The province later became known as Brittany, or Little Britain. A form of the Brittonic language similar to Welsh is still spoken today in Brittany. In Brittany, St. Gildas wrote a book about his times called The Ruin of Britain. St. Gildas writes like an Old Testament prophet. He claimed the Anglo-Saxon invasion was a punishment from God and bitterly rebukes his people and their leaders, both kings and church leaders, for their sins. The Anglo-Saxons would take control of most of what is now England. The native Britons, who remained independent, were pushed into the corners of the island, to what is now Wales, Cornwall, and southern Scotland. At the same time as Old Britain was collapsing, new frontiers were being crossed in Ireland. Around the year 400, Irish raiders carried away as a prisoner a British boy named Patrick. This boy would grow up to become the St. Patrick of Ireland. We know the story of St. Patrick very well because of an account which St. Patrick wrote himself survives, known as the Confession of St. Patrick. St. Patrick would spend 6 years as a slave in Ireland. Previously, his life had been very careless with regard to the faith. The experience of slavery, however, brought him to repentance and to connect with God through prayer. By a miracle, he was able to escape and return to Britain. He then went to school where he studied at its monastic schools. He then felt a call to return to Ireland and bring the gospel to its people who remained pagan. For this purpose, he was consecrated as a bishop, so that he might establish a new church in that land. St. Patrick's mission would be very successful. Monasteries would be central to the Christianization of Ireland. The Romans had never settled in Ireland, and therefore it had no cities. Instead, monasteries took the place of both spiritual and civic centres. Many of these monasteries were double monasteries, with both monks and nuns led by an abbot or abbess. The abbots and abbesses became very powerful people in Irish society, more so than bishops. Irish bishops existed more for the sake of ordaining clergy than for leadership. Important Irish abbots and abbesses included St. Bridget of Kildare, St. Kevin of Glendalough, and St. Columba of Derry. Ireland produced a unique and rich Christian culture. Irish monasteries became famous as schools to which people from Britain and other parts of Western Europe would go to be educated. Irish scholars also travelled across Western Europe. One of the most famous of these was the 9th century scholar John Scotus Erigena, who produced Latin translations of the works of St. Dionysius the Areopagite and St. Maximus the Confessor. Other Irish monks were inspired by the ideal of pilgrimage as an ascetic feat, leaving behind the familiar world to work out their salvation in an alien land. Irish monks established monasteries on rocky islands to sea like Sgillig Michael off the southwest coast of Ireland. Others travelled further to the Faroe Islands or Iceland. St. Brendan of Clonfert, known as St. Brendan the Navigator, is believed to have even crossed the Atlantic to America. These pilgrim saints often served as missionaries to the places they went. One famous Irish pilgrim saint was St. Columba. He crossed the sea to what is now Western Scotland. This area was then known as Dalriada, a Gaelic-speaking kingdom established by settlers from the north of Ireland. The people of Dalriada were known as the Scots. The name Scot during this period could refer to anyone of Irish heritage. St. Columba established his monastery on the island of Iona. Iona became a base for missionary work. Columba visited the Picts as well as the Scots and brought many to the Christian faith. A vivid account of St. Columba's life and his miracles has been preserved, written by a later abbot of Iona, St. Domnan. It's also possible that the Book of Kells was produced on Iona. The Book of Kells is a 9th century illuminated gospel book and is one of the treasures of ancient Irish Christian culture. It was later taken to another of St. Columba's monasteries at Kells in Ireland and is now treasured at Trinity College in Dublin. Other Irish missionaries also visited Scotland and founded monasteries. This is often reflected in many place names in Scotland, which often begin with the word kill, which comes from the Greek kelia, meaning cell. Thus, Kildonan means the cell of St. Donan. Special items which the missionaries carried with them were handbells and staffs. These often had miraculous powers and were preserved as relics after the saints' deaths. The handbells were used to call people to prayer, but were also known to drive away demons. A bell and staff believed to have belonged to Scotland's St. Fillan are now preserved at the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. Meanwhile, on the island of Lismore, the staff of St. Mulag is preserved and is still known to work miracles, being currently under the protection of the laird of the island. The year that St. Columba died in 597 also saw the first mission to the pagan Anglo-Saxons. The Pope of Rome, St. Gregory the Great, also known as St. Gregory the Diagonalist, sent a monk named St. Augustine with a group of companions to bring the Christian faith to the English. St. Augustine landed in Kent, where he won the approval of its king, King Ethelbert. King Ethelbert already had a Christian wife, St. Bertha, who was a Christian Frankish princess. King Ethelbert eventually accepted the faith himself. St. Augustine was made a bishop, becoming the first Archbishop of Canterbury, the primate of the Church in England. A daughter of King Ethelbert married King Edward of Northumbria. Northumbria at this time covered most of what is now northeast England and southeast Scotland. One of St. Augustine's companions, St. Paulinus, went with the princess to serve as her chaplain. After some careful deliberation, King Edward agreed to accept the faith and was baptized by St. Paulinus. St. Paulinus became the first Bishop of York. St. Edward was killed in battle fighting a pagan rival, King Penda of Mercia. The throne of Northumbria was claimed by a prince named Oswald. Oswald, who had grown up in exile on the island of Iona, where he had been educated and converted to Christianity. Upon becoming king, St. Oswald invited monks from Iona to bring Christianity to his people, who were still largely pagan. The mission was led by St. Aidan, an Irish monk from Iona. St. Aidan founded an Irish-style monastery on the island of Lindisfarne, close to the modern border between England and Scotland. It was also close to the royal capital at Bamborough. Lindisfarne also had a monastic school. Many who were educated there afterwards became missionaries in other parts of England. Among these were the brothers Saints Ched and St. Chad. St. Chad became a missionary bishop in Essex. A church he built at Bradwell-on-Sea is still standing. His brother St. Chad became the first bishop of Lichfield in Mercia. A famous abbess of this period is St. Hilda of Whitby. St. Hilda was a princess who founded a double monastery at the place now called Whitby in Yorkshire. One of the most famous members of her community was St. Cadmon. St. Cadmon worked for the monastery as a swineherd and avoided social occasions due to not being safe. However, after being visited an angel and told to sing about God's act of creation, St. Cadmon found he had both the ability to sing and to compose Christian poetry in his native language. St. Cadmon was then commissioned by St. Hilda to compose poems retelling the whole of Holy Scripture. Sadly, only a few fragments of his work survives. Fortunately, other works of Anglo-Saxon Christian poetry do survive. The most famous of these is The Dream of the Rood, which tells the story of the crucifixion from the point of view of the cross itself. Portions of this poem are carved in runes on the 8th century Roughwell cross near Dumfries. Another pupil of Lindisfarne was St. Wilfrid. In search of higher learning, St. Wilfrid visited Rome and was impressed by everything he saw there. He made it his life's work to bring the glories of Christian Rome to his native Northumbria. At this time, a dispute began between the two missions to the Anglo-Saxons. There were several differences between the practices of the Irish missionaries and the Roman missionaries. The most important of these was that they had different dates for celebrating Easter. The Irish followed a form of calculating Easter once used in Rome, which had since been superseded by a more accurate method of calculating Easter. Many in the south of Ireland had already accepted this more accurate method. However, the north of Ireland, together with Iona and Lindisfarne, kept to the old method. The Irish also used a form of monastic tonsure, which differed from the tonsure commonly used in the continental West. Many followers of the Irish customs saw these as essential parts of the spiritual inheritance received from their fathers in the faith, namely St. Columba and St. Aidan. The new king of Northumbria, King Oswy, called a synod at the monastery of Whitby in 664. The subject of discussion at the synod was not dogmatic, but concerned church discipline, and which customs were to be followed in the kingdom. The Synod of Whitby decided in favour of the Roman customs and the new calculation of Easter. St Wilfrid had been the foremost representative of the Roman party at the synod. He afterwards became a bishop and founded monasteries at Hexham and Ripon. This is an illustration of the original monastery he founded at Hexham. And these churches are built in the Roman style. This is Hexham Abbey as it is today. He even sought to give pilgrims an experience of the Roman catacombs, constructing an elaborate crypt in which he enshrined relics he brought back with him from Rome. This is the crypt at Hexham as it is today. Hexham also treasures the oldest bishop's throne in Britain, which was used by St Wilfrid himself, and also the oldest communion chalice preserved from this period. After the disputes which had rocked the church in England, it was wise for the Pope to choose as an outsider as the next Archbishop of Canterbury. The man chosen was St Theodore, a Greek from Tarsus in Asia Minor. St Theodore was part of a large Greek community living in Rome, who had escaped from the advance of the Roman invasion from the Muslim invasion in the East, and the various heresies being promoted by the same by some of the emperors in Constantinople. He possibly knew St Maximus the Confessor, who lived in Rome during this same period. St Theodore's appointment as Archbishop of Canterbury clearly shows how during this period both East and West understood themselves as being one united church. The figure who shines most in this period is St Cuthbert. St Cuthbert was born near Melrose in what is now the Scottish borders. He became a monk at the monastery at Melrose, and later moved to the monastery of Lindisfarne. By a saintly example, he's able to introduce the Roman-style customs to the monks at Lindisfarne. Later, St Cuthbert withdrew to become a hermit on the island of Innerfarne, some miles off the coast. Due to his sanctity, he was made a bishop by a local council led by Archbishop Theodore. St Cuthbert, however, preferred his life on the isle as a hermit, and refused to accept the appointment. Eventually, the king of Northumbria, King Ecgfrith, together with St Trumwine, Bishop of Abercorn, went to the island to beg him to accept the office of bishop. St Cuthbert served as bishop for 2 years, and during this period it's believed he visited Edinburgh, preached to the people of Edinburgh on the site now occupied by St Cuthbert's Church close to the castle. Before returning to Innerfarne, he then returned to Innerfarne where he reposed in peace. His body was laid to rest on Lindisfarne. Some years later, his body was uncovered and found to be incorrupt. His relics were enshrined at in the monastery church. Some years later, an illuminated gospel book was produced to adorn the shrine. This book is known as Lindisfarne Gospels and is now preserved in the British Library in London. Another outstanding figure of this period, which is known as the Northumbrian Golden Age, was St Bede the Venerable. St Bede lived in the monastery of Wearmouth in Jarrow, what's now Monk Wearmouth near Sunderland, and Jarrow near Newcastle. These two monasteries operated as one. They're founded by St Benedict Biscop. St Benedict Biscop had visited Rome, and like St Wilfrid was very impressed and wanted to bring back to Northumbria the glories of Christian Rome. He brought back many books, relics, and craftsmen who could build churches in the Roman style, including glaziers, who could make glass windows for his churches. The first buildings in Britain since Roman times to have glass windows. St Benedict also introduced the rule of St Benedict. He even adopted St Benedict's name as his own. The monasteries of Wearmouth and Jarrow had a famous school and a workshop for producing manuscripts. One of the most famous survivals from this scriptorium is the Codex Amiantinus. This is the oldest complete surviving copy of St. Jerome's Latin Vulgate Bible. It was intended as a gift for the shrine of St. Peter in Rome. However, the abbot St. Culfrith, who commissioned and was taking the gospel book, the Bible to Rome, died while travelling through northern Italy, where it has remained ever since. St. Bede wrote numerous commentaries on Holy Scripture, which can still be read today, as well as scientific books, which helped lay the basis for our system of dating the years from the birth of Christ, and also to predict the tides of the sea. One of his best achievements was his book, The Ecclesiastical History of the English People, a history of Christianity in Britain. Indeed, the reason why we know so much about this period is largely thanks to St. Bede. I highly recommend reading the Ecclesiastical History, this valuable portrait of Britain as a recognisably orthodox country. The Golden Age also saw monks and nuns from Britain going to the continent as missionaries. St. Willibrord missionised the Netherlands, becoming the first Bishop of Utrecht. St. Boniface was a monk from Devon who travelled through Germany, becoming Archbishop of Mainz, before being martyred by pagans. His female disciple, St. Leoba of Wimborne, also joined his mission to Germany and became abbess of a monastery at Fulda. It is significant that the English were heavily involved in the Christianization of their pagan cousins, who remained on continental Europe. The Northumbrian Golden Age also came to a tragic end in 793, when the first Viking raid attacked the monastery of Lindisfarne. The stone from Lindisfarne commemorates this event. After a further raid on the monks of Lindisfarne abandoned the monastery and travelled and settled in various locations around northern England and southern Scotland, taking with them the relics of St. Cuthbert and the Lindisfarne Gospels. They eventually settled at Durham, where the relics of St. Cuthbert remain. The relics were uncovered last in the 19th century, and the pectoral cross of St. Cuthbert was discovered, together with the remains of St. Cuthbert's original coffin, which is decorated with images of the Mother of God, Christ, the Apostles, and angels. A small portion of St. Cuthbert's relic, which was removed at this time, is now treasured by the Orthodox community of Edinburgh. Viking raids would also attack Iona and other important monasteries. One by one, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms fell to the pagan Vikings. Eventually, only the kingdom of Wessex in the south remained. The king of Wessex, King Alfred, fought valiantly against the invaders, eventually winning a victory over them at the Battle of Edington in 878. King Alfred and the Viking ruler King Guthrum made peace, agreeing to divide England between them, following the diagonal line you can see on the map, which largely follows the line of the Watling Street, the Roman road which crosses central England. King Guthrum also agreed to accept baptism, with King Alfred serving as his godfather. King Alfred was a devout king. He spent the rest of his reign rebuilding the Christian culture of England, which had been largely destroyed by the Vikings. He founded new monasteries and encouraged the translation of important books into English. This work was continued by St. Dunstan, a monk who became Archbishop of Canterbury, and St. Ethelwald, Bishop of Winchester. At the centre of this project of reform and renewal was the founding of monasteries based on the rule of St. Benedict. Later, English kings succeeded in taking back the territory occupied by the Vikings, creating a united Kingdom of England. At the same time, the Pictish kingdom in the far north collapsed due to Viking attacks. The king of the Scots, King Kenneth MacAlpin, managed to defeat the Vikings and united both Picts and Scots as one kingdom of Alba, which later grew into the Scotland we know today. The Christian Picts also adopted St. Andrew as their patron saint. He now became the patron saint of the new United Nation of Alba. According to legend, the relics of St. Andrew were brought from Patras in Greece by St. Regulus, or St. Innocent Rule, and a group of followers. These had disagreed with plans to translate the relics to Constantinople, and therefore decided to take them to the ends of the earth. They settled on the east coast of Scotland, at the place now known as St. Andrews, where the relics were enshrined, and the ruins of a later cathedral can be seen on the site. However, it is perhaps more possible that the relics of St. Andrew were enshrined in St. Andrews by St. Acca, Bishop of Hexham, during the 7th century, during the Northumbrian Golden Age, a time when Northumbria stretched far into Pictish territory. Edinburgh's saint is Saint Fridolana. Little is known about her, though stories tell that she was a Greek and one of the companions of St. Regulus when he came from Greece. They also tell that she pulled out her own eyes in order to repel the unwanted advances of a Pictish king. Whatever the truth of these stories, it seems certain that she settled at Wresselrig, now a suburb of Edinburgh, which afterwards became her principal shrine. A medieval shrine chapel remains which encloses the holy well. People came to the well especially to seek healing for eye complaints, and there are reports of healings taking place there as late as the 17th century. The usual date given for the Great Schism is 1054. However, as said in the previous talks, the events of 1054 were seen at the time as being a dispute between Rome and Constantinople, not as a lasting division affecting the whole church. It is therefore customary to see Britain continuing to be Orthodox for some time after 1054. In 1061, a lady in the village of Walsingham in Norfolk beheld a vision of the Mother of God. In the vision, the Blessed Virgin showed the lady the house in Nazareth, where she received the visitation of the Archangel Gabriel. She gave instructions for a replica of the house to be built in England. The lady built the house according to the dimensions she'd seen in the vision. The Holy House of Walsingham would have become one of the most significant places of pilgrimage in Western Europe. The original Holy House was destroyed at the Reformation. However, a replica was built in the early 20th century, which is now housed inside the present Anglican shrine at Walsingham. There is a small Orthodox chapel inside the shrine. The real date of the end of Orthodoxy in England is usually given as the Norman invasion in 1066. The Normans deposed all but one of the English bishops, placing them with bishops from France. These new bishops introduced the fruits of the Continental Papal Reformation, which had led to the final estrangement of the West from the Orthodox Church. A similar reform of the Church took place in Scotland, led by Queen Margaret, wife of King Malcolm of Cranmore. Much of the heritage of Orthodox Britain would be destroyed during the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. However, enough survives to give us a good picture of the period. A few churches survive. The earliest churches were typically made from wood and thus subject to fire or decay. Stone churches were often replaced over time. One Anglo-Saxon church which remains almost completely unaltered is at Escombe in County Durham. The church at Breedon on the Hill in Leicestershire has one of the largest collections of Anglo-Saxon Christian carved stones. The most impressive of these is the Breedon Angel. What is remarkable about this sculpture is the fact that the angel's right hand is shown giving a distinctively Eastern style of blessing, a form not used in the Western Orthodox Church of this period. This carving then testifies to the unity of the Church during this period. The sculptor must have either come to Britain from the East himself, or acquired extensive knowledge of the Eastern religious art through travel. Across Britain can be seen ancient standing crosses. These crosses often mark places of religious gatherings, memorialized significant people or events, or more importantly, served to sanctify the land and drive away demons with the sign of the Holy Cross. Iona has a collection of large stone crosses in the Irish style, such as this St. John's Cross. Picts of East Scotland also developed their own style of Christian art, often incorporating pre-Christian symbols. Crosses of a similar design can also be seen in Wales, such as this at Nevern, and the Isle of Man, such as this at Lonan. Cornwall has a plentiful abundance of crosses, many near churches or roadsides. Many of these crosses from Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, and the Isle of Man follow the distinctively Celtic style of cross, in which the cross is surrounded by a circle. There are a number of theories about the significance of the circle. One that it was a practical support for the arms of the cross. However, the theory I prefer most is that the circle is a halo surrounding the cross to show that it is a holy object, in the same way that we depict halos around the heads of saints. This motif is used in this 5th century mosaic from Ravenna. Crosses were also used to Christianize existing pre-Christian monuments. The life of St. Sampson of Dol tells how the saint, while travelling through Cornwall, came upon a group of pagans worshipping around an ancient standing stone. St. Sampson preached the gospel to them and afterwards carved a cross onto the stone. Crosses from Anglo-Saxon England follow a more continental design. A particular motif on these crosses, on the shaft of some of these crosses, is the image of birds eating grapes, a motif found throughout ancient Christendom from Northumbria to Constantinople. Another common feature in Britain's sacred landscape are holy wells, dedicated to saints, many of which possess healing powers. Perhaps the most famous and visited holy well in Britain is St. Winifred's Well at Holywell in Wales. The life of St. Bino tells how St. Bino's niece Winifred was killed by a local prince after she refused to marry him. The prince cut off her head, and on the spot where her head fell, a spring of water appeared. St. Bino restored St. Winifred to life, and she spent the rest of her life as a nun. The spring that appeared had a wonder-working power, and miracles are still reported there to this day. A small relic of St. Winifred is also preserved at the shrine. There's also a large bathing pool for pilgrims, in which pilgrims can bathe in the holy water. Very few original saints' shrines survive, though some have been restored in recent times. One which has survived the centuries is the shrine of St. White at Whitchurch Canonicorum in Dorset. For years, no one knew what this monument in the local church was, until it was opened and inside was found a box containing the bones of a woman and an inscription declaring them to be the relics of St. White, an ancient British saint, also known as St. Gwen. She was the mother of several saints before becoming a nun. One of her children was St. Cadfan, who founded the monastery on Bardsley Island. A shrine which has been recently restored is the shrine of St. Melangeth at Pennant Melangeth in a remote part of Mid Wales. Here St. Melangeth, an Irish princess, dedicated herself to a life of solitary prayer. Later a church was built to house her relics. The original shrine was destroyed at the Reformation. However, stone fragments of the shrine were discovered in the 20th century, and the shrine was reconstructed in 1989. Previous to this, in 1958, the bones of a woman were discovered hidden under the floor of the apse of the church, which beyond doubt are the relics of St. Melangeth. These relics have since been placed inside the restored shrine, and now once more pilgrims come to visit. An awareness of the British saints and holy places has grown once more in recent years, especially amongst Orthodox Christians, and pilgrims have returned to the places I've mentioned. There are also many other more that I have not had the time to talk about. I hope, however, that this talk inspires you to find out more about the saints of the British Isles and make your own pilgrimages to Britain's holy places.